And like for me, like there's definitely a lot of the social aspects this week where the kids are kind of struggling with it. Like they're happy to see each other and they've really missed everybody, but there's also a lot of difficulty that actually comes with being back together again. And I suppose, yeah, I'm definitely noticing just how much of an impact or an influence like the social side has on learning.
Yeah, for me, I find that I've really had to go back to basics with a lot of just the socialisation rules, little conflicts, little silly things, and we've had to go back, even in P7s and using, hang on, is this a big deal? Is this a wee deal? Can we deal with it? Do you need an adult to deal with this? And, you can see them thinking, maybe not, but that kind of just not being used to having to work with so many people, I've certainly found a challenge in my class.
Yeah, a lot of mine seem to be really self-conscious this week. Like before they'd have been like, yeah, I'll come up and I'll, we'll share this and I'll talk about this, and now barely anybody wants to. So I think, I don't know where that stems from. It's a big shock coming back after so long away, but yeah, there's definitely a sort of self-conscious side to things that I'm seeing.
I totally agree with you there. My kid, who would always read out in class, be delighted to do it. The other day I was like, oh, can you just quickly read that bit of the book? And not a single person put up their hand, and I was like, wow. Whereas before they'd be, oh yeah, I'll do it, It's different.
I think that's really interesting, and it links. There's one that's sort of scrolling about talking about how online learning gave some pupils a chance to shine, and that they might be overshadowed in class, and it links quite closely to that. Actually, it was much more comfortable being online almost, and having had that experience and then being thrust back into the classroom, thinking about, so what are the mechanisms we have in classroom to make sure they continue to shine?
I think the sore heads one ties in a bit with that, Stuart, as well. The difference in just a simple thing like noise levels around the classroom and around the house. Definitely noticing that, and I'm sure the kids are as well. How they're feeling about a busy, noisy playground and a busy, noisy classroom.
This kind of leads us on nicely to that. So there's sort of themes that are emerging there in terms of what you noticed. I guess it is then just, so what matters, and what does that mean in terms of the possibilities about autonomy and where we see this could go and what it could happen. So I guess that question, what does matter? Out of all those things that we've seen there, what matters, and what do you see the possibilities being in terms of learner autonomy and that autonomy that they've had and the potential that you now have in class with that? And some of the drawbacks as well, because there were some drawbacks in there for sure.
I think one of the big things coming back is the children have had 2 experiences during lockdown now, and they were quite different. The first one, I felt we fumbled around a lot, and the children noticed that, so that when we came back the first time in August, it was almost like, okay, this is the start of the school year. A lot of people, I feel, myself included, reverted back to doing a lot of the things the way we did pre-lockdown. Whereas this time, coming back halfway through a term, it was, the children were asking things like, oh, where are my big tasks? The things that we put on Teams, and that's not something that we did prior to that. I think the way that we structured how the day works, how the classroom works is slightly different, and because it's, on the Friday they were at home and then on the Monday they were in school, we've managed to bring a lot of what autonomy looked like for lockdown into the classroom, which has been good. So we've kept up using Teams. That's how they post work now, and it's making them a lot more independent and a lot more self-directed. And just the conversation and things like, they know in the classroom that they don't all have to be working on the same thing at the same time. And just little things like that, I think, have been really nice to see crop up. And, okay, like, yep, you two can do the same task together. Some of you can go outside to do it. You don't need to work on that task right now, and they do have a bit more freedom and a bit more choice with it. So that's been, just kind of cherry-picking parts of remote learning and trying to bring them into the classroom is what I've been working a lot on this week. I think the choice element is important. That's what I was trying to say in a very long-winded way.
I think for me, like, I think what you've said is important as well. I think I've got some children who don't seem to really care very much about their learning at the moment. And for me, like, it matters that they do. Like, I want the kids that I'm working with to care about their learning, to care about their future. And I think quite a few of them have been quite negative about themselves. And yeah, it matters to me that they see themselves in a positive way. So I think when it comes to, like, we did have a lot of freedom before, like, the lockdown, and we continued that on through the way that we were working. But I do think that for some of them, I think they're maybe just lacking, like, the purpose in what they're doing for some. And I feel like that is an important part too. So it has to be, like, purposeful, the things that they're working on.
I think the purpose will come though eventually, if you know what I mean. I know I'm obviously in a different position because I go and observe other people teach in my school, but we're noticing a lot of low-level behaviour incidents, a lot of texting under tables. We're a digital school. We use digital technology all the time. We've driven it hard, even like way before lockdown. But we're having issues with our digital technology that we've never had with our pupils, and it's almost like they've got into such bad habits of always having their phone in their hands. They cannot put them down. A child got sent to me today, for example, for using it as a barrier between themselves and the teacher. In a rude way, but actually it's just because they're so used to having it, I think, in their hands. So we're seeing a lot of that, and we're certainly having to structure our whole curriculum around health and well-being. We're trying to go to a bit more structured approach around literacy and numeracy, but our kids aren't ready yet, is the truth. And I think, somebody reflected that this lockdown was really different for children. Those of us who have our own kids as well, they couldn't get out to play. They couldn't, it felt really different, this lockdown. It wasn't the last lockdown. As a parent, almost had a sense of excitement about it in a way. Your adrenaline was going. It was a bit new. You were trying to do all these wonderful family things. This time was just, I don't know, but it was just harder. It was dark. Our kids were inside all the time. And I think that has been reflected in what we see coming back, and certainly what our children want from education coming back. We can see a real reflection of that need almost just to be free and be outside for a bit. That we're seeing a lot of that come through.
Just to pick up on that point, I think it's one of those interesting things that, like the example of the child with the phone in their hand, and obviously it's an example where it was being used as a barrier, it was being used negatively, but it's straight away those sorts of things that, well, you're back in school now, you can't have your phone in your hand all the time. And it's like, but why? Why? And I think that's where we start to look at, so what are the possibilities? Because coming back to that comment of online learning gave children a chance to shine, that wouldn't normally. Well, was that because they could communicate through other means? Was that because they had access to these sorts of things? And I think it's sort of looking at that and considering, is that one of the possibilities? Is that something that we could explore? Because, yeah, there are definite negatives to it, but I think we have seen across the course of lockdown that communication was probably more positive for some people because they could put their points across in text format, and they were able to form their ideas and think about it rather than being put on the spot. And I don't know if that's something that is a possibility with technology. And one of those sort of traditions it's hard to break in school, because there is that association with you're being antisocial, you've got your head on your phone, partly because of we grew up in an age where it's rude to have your head on the phone, whereas that's just the norm for some. And is it acceptable? Is it not? How do we make it conducive to the learning?
Definitely, I think you're right. As I say though, we were doing bring your own devices a long time ago, and all of our kids have had phones. And I think we have to be quite careful around still the appropriate use of technology. There's a whole wealth of learning around technology. So a lot of our children have got faces in their phones, and we're having to do a lot of chat about that. So yeah, definitely the continuation of teams, definitely the continuation of Seesaw with our younger ones, because we've seen a lot of children who wouldn't speak in the classroom but will record their voice through Seesaw. So all of that, taking those positives. but remembering that there's a training issue for our children as well, in terms of the appropriate use of technology and the appropriate time maybe to have your head in the phone, but the inappropriate time when it is just being rude, basically, you know, that training. But maybe not coming down hard on them, maybe using it as a learning opportunity rather than yelling at them, you know, just using that opportunity to really talk to them about it. And the difference now between the learning environment they were in at home and the learning environment they're in at school, how we cross that barrier to make that agile learning community, but safe for all people, basic, I guess.
So I guess this kind of develops the point, and this question is to anyone. I'm not picking on you, Catherine. Who decides when it is appropriate?
Make a change.
Who decides when it's appropriate to have your head in the phone and when it's not? Like, just because the teacher, generally, I guess that's the adult in the room, perceives it's not appropriate, does that make it not appropriate? Who decides that? In particular, when children have been controlling what they learn when they learn it. So whose choice is it when that's appropriate? And do they get the choice to justify?
That's almost like a conversation, you know, when you do your class charters, you know, it's a conversation to have with the group that you're working with. Right, we're going to be allowed to use phones for certain things. What is our responsibility that comes around that? It was really interesting because we're not a school that allows phones in or anything like that. So we are a multi-composite 5-6. But one of the kids, they've been working on a project, but they couldn't upload it onto Teams. So they said to me yesterday, can I bring my phone in? And I was like, yeah, of course you can. And all the kids were like, oh, he can bring his phone in. And it was really dramatic. And I thought, well, what's the problem with him bringing his phone in? So he can upload it and then put it back in his bag. And he can phone anyone. And we ended up having that conversation about, well, you've got your phone when you're out of school, and do you do anything bad with it then? So why would you do that in school? And it was really good because he brought his phone in, he got a plug, he hooked it up, and then there was lots of kids who didn't know how to do that from home, and he almost had this like point, oh yeah, this is what you do, plug it into your laptop, and this is how you transfer all the files. And it was just I think that's, like, for me, what's important is that you don't place rules just because the rules are there. Like, just because that's a school rule isn't good enough for me. So yeah, our school rule is no phones in class, but having that justification for it, I think, is really important, and that's part of autonomy. Well, why can't I do this? Because actually I needed to do that, or else you wouldn't have gotten my work. So I think that communication and setting up boundaries with the children is what's really going to matter moving forward.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We're currently looking at our class charters and calling them agile learning charters now, and we're trying to have a look at how that is going to cross over into school and home, kind of that, you know, where the rights of the child are and all of that. So I agree with that. It's a matter of reteaching what learning is in a way now, but for everybody, for staff as well, having to think about what learning actually means to a child now. I totally agree.
I think it can be really exciting too. For instance, today we did a project in school where we were doing our write project, and it was part of a previous learning we've already done. And one of my kids said, but can I write it on notes on my phone? And I said, well, yeah, of course. Like, as long as you get uploaded and so saved in some way. So I said, before you upload it, like, maybe save it on Word, then you can re-edit it at another point. But yeah, of course. And I mean, she whizzed away for ages, was like this for absolutely ages. And then afterwards, she was like, look how much I've done. And this excitement can be really, really good from using technology they're super used to, and not necessarily even using like office programs we would originally use. It's that ability to be autonomous in choosing what program to use in order to record those notes and those ideas. And it can be super exciting, especially for this particular person who got well excited about it.
And I think that brings it quite nicely back to the point that Julie had made about it's all about choice, and a huge part of autonomy is choice, and just opening that up. And I guess the experience is every kid during lockdown has had a totally different experience, and it's then, well, what were the choices that they had available to them, and what the choices they didn't have available, and how do we balance that out when we're in school and take note of the positive things that were there as well, because as much as we keep talking about learning loss and all of these negative aspects to it, there are children that probably had access to much more sophisticated ways of learning at home than they can now come back into school, and it's like, oh, sorry, we don't have enough iPads to go around, or we don't have enough laptops to go around. It's kind of like, actually, was there more access to learning at home or at school? And I think that's a consideration, at least.
We did a bit of an interesting one where we asked them the children, like they read the document, and one of them, the questions in the kind of areas was what worked well during remote learning, and what was your favourite task and why? And I got some really interesting replies of things that I would never have associated with that particular child, or seen as a strength, or even that they would definitely like warm to. So for instance, there were certain areas of like maths where certain kids were like, I love this so much. And it's the strange idea that actually maybe that ability to explore it almost by yourself without time constraints gave them that love of it, when maybe if they are moved on to the next thing too quick in a classroom because of the structure of it, the natural structure of like a school day, that they wouldn't have the chance to develop that joy at their own pace.
Anyone that I've spoken to for any length of time, I always bring this point up, and it's this: learning can be viewed in two ways, in terms of learning as a means to an end, or learning for the joy of learning. And I think we do an awful good job of communicating learning as a means to an end in school, where it's like, well, you need to know this because then you'll have to do your standard, or not standard grades, I'm showing my age, you'll have to do your Nat 5s, or you'll have to do your hires, and then you'll need it for university. And it's very much communicating that, well, learning is a means to an end, it is work, rather than learning just for the joy of it. And I think that's kind of what you captured there, that idea of, yeah, but kids just love learning, and why is that a bad thing? Why are we not just opening them up to that? Yeah, go and learn and enjoy it. And I think one of the things that learners had said that I'd asked about or spoken to was like they missed being able to listen to their own music. And again, that just comes back to that re-exploration of the class charter, the class rules of like, well, is there any harm in them sitting with headphones in? How do we make that acceptable in the classroom? How do we bring that into the rules? And I think it's just that sort of totally re-evaluating. So what do our rules actually need to actually achieve now? Because it should be achieving totally different things than they were before.
The big thing that came out when I was speaking to kids about it as well was the missing doing things outdoors. And I don't mean obviously they got outdoors during lockdown and so on, but I mean, missing doing things outdoors at school, whether it's PE or doing other learning outdoors, missing types of learning that they maybe couldn't replicate at home because of lack of materials or whatever. Art in particular jumped out and conversations and the questions that asked about learning at home. So I think not forgetting what matters is not forgetting about the drive for outdoor learning and getting kids outdoors more and doing a lot more outdoors, whether it is art or PE or whatever we can do.
Picking up on what Kenny was just saying there, that idea of outdoor learning, having that autonomy to move indoor, outdoor freely, and it not being a case of, am I allowed to go work outdoor? Why is that just not an expectation of, if it is feasible within the school, in terms of if there is access to outdoors from the classroom, why can't we just move freely between the two spaces? That idea of openness, rather than it being dictated by the teacher when you can or cannot go outside.
Yeah, I think certainly for our kids, there's been more of a, I don't know, yes, they're still asking for permission to do things, but they're asking for permission to do things that they never would have asked for before. I mean, we had 20 minutes. They really, really are into plasticine right now. I mean, it's making a massive comeback. And it was a lovely day today. So some of the kids were like, oh, can we just take this? Is it okay if we take this plasticine outside? And I said, well, absolutely. And then they were all like, no, you can't. It'll get dirty. And, they had to do this wee bit of, oh, let's get a painting mat and take it outside. Oh, we need to bring the tools? Well, I'll put them in a box. And just that I don't think they would have asked to do that before. We're really lucky that we've got like a fire escape door in our classroom. So like, don't tell it. Oh, there's too many people here. Maybe you should edit this part out, Stuart, that we just put a chair against the fire escape and then the kids can move freely escape. You see them. Oh, I can see Mrs. Bench there like, oh no. If this is my last day on the job, it's been a great day into it outside. But it's lovely because the kids are like, yeah, okay, I can see them. And now what happened after that was there was a lot of chances throughout the day where they were like, oh, nah. I was like, yeah, of course you can. Stay where I can see you. And they've been really good at that. So it was nice knowing all of you.
I think for me, like, see, when I asked the kids those questions from like the Inspire Challenge, I've gathered the data from it myself, but I feel like throwing it back at them and being like, right, here's the data that we collected. So what what next, like what could the actions be? Because we did, in line with it, kind of, I left a space for like what are our actions, what could our next steps be, but because we've not had a chance to actually come together and see what everyone's responses were, it's hard to decide what the actions should be. So that's my kind of plan for tomorrow, is to send it back their way and say, look, this is what you said you would miss, this is what you said that you miss about everyone being together, so what should we do?
I think that sort of both examples there kind of show that like real life learning or lived experience of negotiation, and that point that we started off with those niggles and that socialization issues. It's like, well, yes, they are problematic when you're running a class, but they are lived experiences of having to negotiate and having to make sure that everyone is involved. And it's one of those, like, going right back to play and the purpose of play, and it's that whole idea of, well, if you're playing a game and it is a real experience, then you need to be able to like get on with people and negotiate the rules and make sure that you don't annoy other people, because if nobody wants to play, then you don't have a game anymore. And it's that whole idea of like, but how does that progress through the school? And we're given real experiences for you to negotiate this and propose this, and we're not going to say yes to everything all of the time, but it's that sort of, well, make your argument, make your case, because I'm not going to say no all the time either. And I think having that sort of sense of autonomy in a room, or that expectation, those rights of a child within a room. We talk about rights of the child all the time, and it's that, but what is the forum, what is the platform to give them those rights, and the atmosphere within that classroom that allows them to feel confident to do that as well. Because confidence is a huge thing, that keyboards inspire confidence, and it's how do we keep that confidence back in the classroom?
That learning to play and what that like up through the school, I think that's really important. That's something we've been thinking about quite a bit this week, seeing how the kids are getting along out in the playground, and during break times, or while the teachers have had them outside, and thinking about, well, what is this going to look like now? Look like the following year? What's it going to look like when they're in primary 7? If we don't, do something about this and consider that socialisation and learning to play.
So what do you think the structures that we currently have in place, or the traditions, or the legacy aspects that make autonomy difficult, or make taking what was happening into the classroom and giving that freedom, what makes it difficult? What are the things that we'd maybe need to break down or consider when we look at those possibilities?
A thing that a lot of my kids have mentioned with their thoughts is there's two things, and I think as adults we all empathise with this. Not being able to get food when I wanted to, and not wearing comfy clothes were two of my big hitters that were like, I hate this when we go back to school, and waking up early. That was another very, very sort of teenagers piece ever kind of feeling towards it. But actually, the idea of maybe when people eat food and things like that could be potentially addressed. Obviously, not in this current climate, we have to be quite specific about it. But moving forward, could we explore maybe a different time for snack time and stuff like that? Because is it necessary to make sure that every child eats at exactly this time, at exactly the same time every day? I don't know.
But it's things like that I find really interesting, because it's those structures and those rules that are in place. And until something happens where somebody goes, oh, I'm not hungry right now, and you think, oh, well, you have to be hungry, you have to eat right now because that's the time you have to eat. What other place in the entire world does that happen other than a child in school? You're not told at 10:30, you must eat this apple. I'm like, if I want this at 11, I'll have it at 11. Even if I am in school, I'll do that. It's so interesting, the things that have cropped up, and you think, what is the point? Why do I do this? Why can't they just go outside? Question.
One of the schools that I visited and observed at, they didn't have eating times as such, or break times. They had periods of, like, between 10 o'clock and 11:30, you need to take a 15-minute break at some point, have your snack, have your break. And they said one of the things that they noticed was they didn't have to tell kids or teach kids how to tell the time anymore, because they had a purpose for having to know the time. And that sort of, oh, well, it's almost time that sort of phase of being able to eat is over. So, and it's that sort of, why isn't that acceptable? And I get that there are logistics involved in that, but it's thinking about, well, how hard would it be to sort of break down some of those logistics? Because, yeah, as you say, it just seems so ludicrous when you start discussing it. Like, oh, no, you must eat now. I don't care if you're hungry. Go. It just sounds so ridiculous.
And I think it will move away from that the more we move away from the current scenario. For instance, we did have, prior to this point, food bowls, so all fruit bowls on our tables, and that was awesome because then actually people could eat and go, and they were in the middle of doing something, they grabbed some fruit, which again is a healthy snack, number one, and number two, like it was that time change. Obviously, in the current circumstance, we can't do that because there's a lot of logistics involved in if you touch your face, if you touch anything, yeah. But hopefully, we will move back towards that. But it's not just about fruit on a table. It can be more of a kind of broader ranging idea.
I think eating when you can eat or not is right up there with my pet hate of like having to put up your hand to ask to go to the toilet. It just seems so archaic. You think there are other ways that we could facilitate this in a safe way, and I get the safety aspects of it, but as you say, when we're talking about autonomy on this grand scale, it's then looking at, well, what are the really small aspects of autonomy that kids don't have freedom over this, and this? So why even consider it on a much grander scale until you sort out the things that are essentially easy to fix?
That's a big thing that we talk about in this school as well, is that for a long time, well, a couple of children were not allowed to just leave, but it's always been let me know when you're going to the bathroom, if you need to go, give me a wave, make sure I can see you. And that was working for, I've been here for 5 years, and ever since I started, I've always been like, you don't have to ask to do those stupid, can I drink my water? What? I'm not going to tell you, no, you can't drink your water. Don't ask me silly things. And they've gotten so much better, but lockdown coming back, they've totally reverted back into, I need permission to do everything. And it's quite interesting because I know they've not been asking permission to go to the bathroom at home. So why, when they come back after not doing it for a long time, do they feel like, oh, I suddenly don't have permission to do these things, even though with the same person in the same room they did before? So I think it's just about re-establishing what you have choice over and what you have autonomy over. And like, yeah, the silly things like, no, you don't have to ask me to go and sharpen your pencil. Just go and do it. I'm getting so much of that again, and I'm just thinking, hang on a minute. Did you have to do that when you were doing your maths at home? Like, did you have to go and ask your mum every time you wanted to go and, take another colour of pen? Like, no. So I think certainly for me, tomorrow on the Friday before coming back on Monday is going to be about re-establishing what that means. How much choice do we have? What are the things we need permission to do? And what are the things we don't need permission to do? And I think that's a really interesting place to start. Especially if you've not had those conversations with your kids before. It'd be interesting to see what they think they need permission for and what they don't.
Not that I'm trying to invent a theme of the conversation, but it does keep coming back to that idea of those rules, those expectations, that atmosphere in that class, and that being a huge part of it. And that charter, those expectations, sort of, again, reevaluating that. So what does agile rules look like? What does autonomous expectations look like in that? Because one of the big things in sort of a recent study in looking at autonomy is children from less deprived backgrounds deal better with autonomy than children that come from more deprived backgrounds. And it's part of that expectation, that idea of, no, it's okay to say no. It's okay to negotiate or propose at something different. You don't have to smile and nod and just agree in case you get into trouble. And I think it's sort of explicitly setting that as an expectation of, if you've got a different way of doing things or you have a different suggestion, then pose that, because I think that's part of that atmosphere, that's part of that expectation, and sort of living that value in the classroom as well, as opposed to just, oh, that's great, sticking it up on the wall and then never coming back to it. But I think it's an interesting point that has come from the chat that has emerged, that I didn't think it was going to be the rules for autonomy, but it is almost that, how do you set the expectations? I could chat forever about it, but I am aware it is sunny outside, and I'm aware we said would be done at 4:30. What we will do is we'll leave the space open, and your proverbial free pen, in the chat space just now, the general space, there is a post that is a autonomy web. So we talk about autonomy in this way as if like everyone knows what it is. Everyone has a sense of autonomy. It's just one of those buzzwords we put out there, like differentiation, that nobody knows what it means anymore. It's just become a word. So the group, and Julie in particular, have worked on like an autonomy skills web, and we've always been conscious that whatever we produce, we want it to be accessible for the learners. It's not another tool for teachers. It should be something that we can put in the hands of the learners. And this is kind of something that we would encourage you. It is a prototype. We do not know that it works excellently. We just know that it is something that might be supportive, and it takes autonomy and breaks it down further in terms of it's about organisation, it's about using your initiative, it's about lots of things that we've just talked about, but getting kids to be able to recognise that, learn about that, reflect on it, and maybe sort of identify, well, actually I'm really good at being organised, but I never use my initiative. And them sort of getting that idea of, so what are the aspects of autonomy that we can look at, and sort of bringing it into their world. And it might even be something that you look at and think, how could that inspire those rules, those expectations of the classrooms that we talked about?